Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our online fireside chat, where our panel are going to be discussing the pros and cons of in-housing your marketing. Before we begin, I'll just run through the format. Diane Young, CEO of The Drum, is going to be chairing this discussion. Diane's a well-respected figure in the industry, and we originally asked her to join the panel, but she's kindly volunteered to chair the session, which we're really grateful. Thank you. Diane will be joined by Don Williams, Minter Dahl and John Readman, and we'll be introducing you to them shortly. If you want to ask questions or contribute comments, then please do so via the Q&A box. If possible, Diane will ask the questions as we go, but we've also got time at the end for Q&A. And it might be relevant for us to answer your question directly via the Q&A box, which Abby and I are on hand to do. We're going to be asking you to answer some polls during the course of the session. These are anonymous, and we'd be grateful if you could participate. Diane will introduce a poll that's coming up, ask the question, and then we'd ask you to vote with a simple click. We'll share the results with you, and as I mentioned, it's entirely anonymous. We will not take more than an hour of your time this morning. We're also recording this, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording afterwards. That's all the housekeeping. I'll hand over to Diane to get things started.
Thank you very much, Abby. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this panel session on in-housing, hosted by Modo25. We're going obviously live on Zoom right now. We're going to be recorded, but we're also going live streaming on Facebook. So as Abby said, I'm Diane Young. I'm co-founder and CEO of The Drum. Our aim at The Drum is to help marketers to make better decisions. And so I'm very pleased to be hosting a discussion on what is perhaps the biggest decision that a CMO can make. And that is of in-housing some or all of their marketing services. So we have a superb set of experts this morning, and I'm now going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. I think we'll start with Dawn and then go to Minter and then to John. So please unmute yourselves, put your videos on and let's get started. Dawn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Diane. Thank you very much, Diane, and good morning, everybody. So yes, I'm Don Williams. I'm a partner at KPMG, and I've had the privilege of working with retailers for the last 25 years or so, helping them with the challenges that they face as the world of consumers and consumerism has changed so dramatically over that period. So I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts with people and the chat with and learning some stuff as well off the other panelists.
Excellent. And Minter, if you can give us your video and your audio, please.
I'm trying to get the video. The audio should work.
Okay. I'll tell you what, we'll go to John first while you're trying to sort that out. John, want to join? Ah, Minter, there you are. Let's go.
Right. So thanks for having me on. So my name is Minter Dahl. I'm an author of several books, Future Proof and Artificial Empathy most recently. Also a filmmaker. I like to tell stories. And I did a documentary film on the Second World War called The Last Ring Home. And otherwise, I had 16 years at L'Oreal selling shampoos and hair color to hairdressers. And I did that for 16 years in 4 different countries, 11 different roles.
Thank you. And John?
So first of all, thank you, Diane, for hosting us today. I'm John Readman. I'm the founder and CEO of Modo25. We set the business up back in September as I felt there was an opportunity to help brands and retailers really understand how to drive their marketing forward and take control specifically of their digital marketing and potentially, if appropriate, move that in-house. So really excited and grateful that you could all join us today, and hopefully we'll get lots of exciting questions from the audience as well. So yeah, no, looking forward to it, and thank you for everybody for coming along.
Okay, well, let's start off first of all by asking Don, with his access to a lot of big brands and boardroom level contacts, can you give us an overview of what's happening at the moment in the client sectors that you're familiar with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it might just be helpful just to sort of remind ourselves that when we first started this process, actually the fear was it was going to be a supply problem, not a demand problem, but it quickly morphed into demand problem. And then what I saw happen with retailers is there was sort of a big crisis reaction phase, which essentially started with, oh, when am I going to run out of cash? And therefore ended up with conversations around cash conservation, cash acceleration methods, and for many wrapped around a conversation around their directors' duties, especially if you're taking a business that demand has just fallen off a cliff as it did in the week before the 23rd lockdown, and then from the 23rd onwards for many. And clearly that we have to generalize a bit, because there are some elements of retailers who are doing very nicely in terms of demand. They've got a problem with demand excess, but for many and for most of our retailers, they've got a lack of demand and therefore a complete fall off of that. So we had this sort of crisis reaction phase that also then came out with the JRS and the furloughing, and therefore a decision to be made about whether you hibernated or not and how that went through. And then there was a short phase of the sort of moral conversation about whether it was right to continue to trade online, how you could keep your people safe, even though we were being encouraged to do so, and also whether it was right or not to accept the JRS and to furlough people. So that was the sort of next bit. And now we're starting to move into the sort of resilience bit. So I now sort of know where my business is, given the decisions I've made. The new normal, if you like, from this phase is happening, and therefore how resilient is my business in this phase, and starting to turn our attention to what happens when we emerge. So how do I reopen stores? How do I reopen my head office? What sort of shape of my business do I want it to be in to take advantage of whatever opportunities are coming my way as we come out of this? And I think certainly in the last week or so, the conversations have really started to turn their attention to that. So I hold a CEO huddle every Monday afternoon, and that was the topic of conversation with the CEOs, some of whom were relatively well advanced in those thoughts, and some of whom were just starting on that journey. And the other thing I think I'd say, which I think I'm going to borrow from Sir John Soares, who ended up heading up MI6, is he reflected on the fact that in these situations, the trends that were already in place and already running get amplified and accelerated. And I think the digital conversation is one of those trends, and there are plenty of other examples, but we've really concertinaed a few years worth of those trends down into a few weeks. Yeah. So just as a bit of a scene set, I thought that might just be relatively helpful in terms of what we've been talking to people about.
Yeah, that is helpful. Mike, I wonder, in those CEO conversations, what's the attitude to marketing and the role that marketing will play in that recovery that they're seeking?
Well, it's quite interesting because before the crisis, I think specifically about digital marketing, there was a conversation going on about the cost of doing business and the ever increasing rise of digital marketing costs and how effective that was, and whether or not that was money well spent, and how people could wean themselves off that drug and how that might feel. Now, quite clearly, this crisis for some, they've turned off their entire digital marketing and yet still seeing the increases that they want online, and also probably not had to spend that much money on customer acquisition costs either, because people have flooded towards them. So if you're a delivery box business, you've had people flooding towards you. I spoke to one online bike business. They put on a year's worth of subscribers in a week. So they've had people flooding in without having to spend. So there was already a question about the cost of doing business. And now that's been accentuated over this period. And I'd be really quite interested from a personal perspective. One of the kind of questions that I think we were grappling with even before this was, is there the talent and the knowledge around the boardroom table to effectively manage and lead digital processes and marketing specifically?
Yeah.
And I think that's worth the debate around here, because from my perspective, I'm not sure there is yet, because we don't have that many digital natives participating around boardroom tables, and how we get to that place, I think, is quite an interesting debate. Okay,
that sounds kind of dangerous in terms of making decisions at high level about digital marketing, doesn't it?
Absolutely,
that's a real challenge. Okay, listen, throughout this, if you've got any comments or questions, please do use the chat at the bottom. Just chip in. But we're going to ask everyone who's on the call now to participate in our first poll. So Abby, if you could put up the poll for us, please. Thank you very much. So we're wondering how you're currently managing your digital marketing. Is it all outsourced to your agency, more than 50% to an agency, all in-house, or over 50% in-house? I'll give you just a few moments to click the buttons. And perhaps, Abby, you could give me the heads up when most people seem to have voted.
I was hoping the panelists get to vote and have like triple vote. score. But
No, I was just trying to click there and I can't either.
Yeah, I think we can set it so you can vote next time.
It's fine, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
of course it doesn't. I was just kidding.
Just want to see if it worked. Okay,
no,
Abby, have we got responses in?
We've got 63% of people of things, so I think we can publish the.
Okay, excellent. Okay,
So we can see.
We've got quite a substantial amount of in-housing going on already.
So that'd be quite good. We should get some great questions and around and how people and why people did that. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, great. Okay, so let's move on then. I'm going to ask all the panelists actually to give us their views on whether the COVID crisis will trigger a mass move towards in-housing, because it's quite a catalyst of an event, really, isn't it? And is this one of the things that's going to change? We'll start with you, Don. And
I think the crisis is, as I said, because we started with this cash reaction, I think it will force people to look forensically at the cost that they're spending and the effectiveness of that spend, and therefore to be much more curious about whether or not there's an opportunity to partner with people. So I'm already hearing that conversation happening, so that potentially opens up the opportunity to outsource and to therefore to not go in-house, but it will be a comparison, and there's going to be a real focus on cost, I think, especially because I think there will be the demand side of our world will be challenged for a while longer to come yet, certainly for the rest of this year.
yeah, and a mentor?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be looking at the cost side, but I tend to think about what's happening here as people looking more at the idea of working remotely and distributedly, and having an outside or outhouse agency obviously is more distributed. And so I think that kind of flows into that narrative quite easily if people are looking for cost savings, and we're now figuring out that we can actually work quite comfortably in remote sittings, or at least comfortably. We're now learning more about what it is to work remotely.
Yeah. John, what do you think? Is this a
major
trigger?
I think Don, both points are absolutely right. And I think Don, the first start point, I think, will be people looking at cost. And they'll be looking at, I suppose, two main things. There'll be the media cost and then the actual agency fees. And I think what we've seen happening over many years is particularly in retail, digital's been performing quite well compared to the high street, so people haven't necessarily run the ruler over that as rigorously as maybe they have their rents or other elements of running their business. So I think what will happen now is when the squeeze is coming on around, right, we've got to optimize our business and reserve our cash, I think people are going to be looking at everything. And I think there's two parts of that. One is the overall agency fees, and is this now a time to, could we do this in-house? I had a conversation with the business the other day, and they were like, well, we pay our agency X, we could have 5 people for that. Well, I don't know whether it's the right thing for that particular business, but that is often how people look at it, rightly or wrongly. And then I think the other part of this whole exercise is looking at, are we actually investing our media in the right channel to attract the right types of customers? And I think what Don was saying before is there are quite a lot of businesses who knee-jerk reaction turned off a lot of their online media, but have still seen quite a lot of demand. So I suppose that then will question, right, what was the incrementality of that digital media spend, and was that a good investment? Yeah. But no, I think it's going to put it under question, and whether or not it's going to, I think it's going to put it on the table as an option. So I do think it will bring it to the table as a discussion, and I suppose what people need really is to understand all the elements of what it means to bring something in-house or not, and I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, okay. I mean, this is a time when everything has been it's been thrown up in the air. Everybody's been, caught unawares, and nobody's sure where everything's going to land. I mean, some people might, as you've said, are experiencing a fantastic surge of business without really marketing, but on the other hand, that's not going to last forever. If you're not in that category, you're going to have to get marketing again to let people know you're open. So is this perhaps a really risky time to think about in-housing if you're not already doing it? Because it's quite a big learning curve.
Yeah, I think it's, in all of change, there's going to be opportunity and risk, and I suppose it really depends on your attitude as a business. I think even if you don't in-house, you definitely need to go through a process of challenging the existing thinking of your agency and questioning what they are and aren't doing, and how they're going to work with your budgets to give you the best performance going forward. Because I also, what you should be prepared for, and I think this is going to be an unfortunate situation, some of the analysis we've been doing is I don't think there's going to be, we lost, as Modo25, we lost a significant number of customers at the beginning of this situation, mainly travel businesses. And I know a lot of other agencies who've lost most of their customers. So I suppose if you're a brand or a retailer, what's your backup plan if your agency disappears? So I suppose that's something people should think about, because again, it's not just customers disappearing for agencies, it could be agencies disappearing for customers. So yeah, there's definitely risks, but there's also opportunity, and I think it's a sensible business that reviews those and has that discussion.
Yeah,
John, I think that's a really interesting point about that, and that's what I meant by resilience. And I think a lot of businesses, a lot of retailers looked at resilience from a product and a point of view. So will I still be able to get supply of the product that my customers want? And what they haven't yet started to do or starting to do is to work all the way down through their P&L to what about the services I need to support me in the work that I'm trying to do to communicate with customers. So I think that point about making sure that you're, whether it's IT, whether it's marketing agencies, how resilient are they? Will they still be there? And how will they support you through a period that is going to require us to change relatively quickly?
Yeah, Minter, what do you think?
Well, I think that a lot of budgets have, for big companies, have had to automatically switch to digital. And because, magazines aren't exactly working so well, or newspapers. So in terms of where you're communicating, all of a sudden people are waking up to the power of e-commerce as a possible channel. They're waking up to what's happening on Facebook. Everyone's come back to using Facebook, and they're using it differently than in the past. So if you're observant in the marketing area, this is an opportunity to ramp up the way you're doing digital. So afterwards, the question, like John was saying, is, well, is my agency the right people to manage the larger presence that we're going to have on digital? And are we prepared to delegate that out to somebody else, or should we be doing that inside? So these are the types of questions I think. So observing what's happening and feeling how it's different right now, and then in the future, how could this actually portend to having more digital presence, more digital conversations? I mean, all we need to do is look at how we've had 193,000 new podcasts come online in the last 3 months, which is an enormous jump on the Apple iTunes. See how people are all of a sudden saying, oh, wow, I didn't think about podcasting before. And now they're waking up to it.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, Diane, just building on that, I think there is this point, isn't it? There's a whole cohort of customers that have found the digital channel either more regularly or just having found it. I mean, FaceTime with my mother who's 78. I mean, it's just one of those examples of people, that a cohort of customers that have started to embrace it. I'm not speaking to any CEOs who think that their store estates, for instance, are going to be anything less the stores than they are now, and that there will be much more engagement with digital channels and digital platforms for them, and therefore that, I think, that presupposes Minter's point about the fact that therefore you would expect some direction of spend to go into that to support that. Then the question is, I think, being much clearer about what you're trying to achieve. Are you in a customer acquisition phase, or are you in an activation phase, or are you actually trying to do something completely different?
I think that the interesting thing there is, as something becomes more important, people start wanting to take more control. And I think what we'll see maybe over time with this is, as digital for some retailers is going to become more and more important now, they will probably look at, well, actually, is it a risk having it sat somewhere else? Should we have that knowledge and experience in-house so that we actually really do understand our metrics. And I completely agree with Don. One of the biggest challenges we face all the time in talking to our clients is people around the boardroom table don't really know the metrics they should be measuring. So then they don't know how to manage it. So they'll say to their marketing director, oh, how are we doing? And the marketing director will go, oh, speak to the head of digital will speak to the agency, and the agency will give them a spreadsheet or maybe a nice online report. But actually, does anybody really know the levers that are going to drive their business? So if anything, this is going to make digital more important, and it's going to make it a bigger, more valuable part of their business. So they're probably going to look at, well, how do we take control of this and ensure that if the relationship breaks with our agency, we've got that knowledge in-house. So again, that's sometimes people are paranoid about leaving an agency because they don't know what the agency knows, and they think there's some magic and some voodoo happening. So yeah, I think yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to put each of you in the spot now, and ask you for a one-word answer to: should CMOs be considering outsourcing now? Don, yes or no?
Yes.
Minter?
It depends.
Well, that was definitely 2 words.
He broke the rules, but he is a creative genius, isn't he?
John, I think I know what you're going to say.
Was it outsourcing or insourcing?
Sorry, in-housing. So did I say? Yeah.
You said
sorry. Yeah. Okay. Let me redo the question. So I'm not talking about in-housing now. I'm talking about outsourcing.
No, other way
they
around.
Actually be considering outsourcing.
No, in-housing.
No, in-housing. You say in-housing, John. I think that's not much of a surprise. So Don.
I think yes, because I think for exactly the reasons, I think you need to question whether or not you've got the right solution for yourself at this point, especially because I think the way in which your customers will be interacting with you will be different, and you will want to interact with them in a different way.
Okay. Minter, sorry, I will give you another chance to answer that question there.
Oh, just elaborate. I mean,
should they be thinking about outsourcing more their work?
I mean, I think having been, run large businesses, these are not something where you just give a dogmatic answer on it. It does depend, because maybe I have a lot in-house and maybe I'm bleeding cash. And so obviously, well, that means I need to look at that. Yeah. If I'm in a position where I've outsourced everything and my digital marketing spend is only 5% of total, but it looks like I should be going to 50, well, then the question really does need to be, well, maybe I ought to in-house this and capture this expertise, because otherwise I'm effectively outsourcing the communication with my customers to people I don't know. Yeah. And is that what you should be doing? So the answer is far more nuanced as far as I'm concerned. And I think it certainly deserves to be explored. Yeah.
I can see somebody's made a very sensible comment on the chat, actually, which is the size of the firm is very relevant. Covering all your marketing internally takes a lot of resource potentially, so it depends on your size. So
I mean, you could take it like if you're in a large investment bank, you can be very large, but your audience isn't necessarily on social or in digital. And I mean, of course, digital is everything somehow, but it depends who your customers are. And if you are selling $100 million yachts and airplanes, is that what you want to be doing right now and rushing into that? Then it's not really your top consideration. You've got another problem. That.
Yeah. Okay, so this session is called The Pros and Cons of In-Housing. So I'm going to first of all look at the pros of in-housing. So what do we see as the advantages of in-housing marketing? So let's start with Minter on that one.
So I come to this having, in the 16 years I was at L'Oreal, the interesting thing is I was about half of the time spent time in subsidiaries or in countries where we were outsourcing, and the other half in-housing. So I actually very much experienced both inside one company. On balance, I am a big proponent of going in-house. The pros. Well, first of all, I consider it one of the prime ways of communicating with your customers. So if you believe that customer centricity is important to you and that your brand should be authentic and have a real voice, how possibly can you outsource that to somebody? Because it's 24/7. It's got to be spontaneous. And this is not something where you can do it by meetings and consensus. Sometimes these are conversations that need to be happening, and you can't, it's just like outsourcing it to an intern. You need to be seriously considering this as a real arm of your CRM. So I think those are the biggest reasons why, or pros. I have others, but I'll let other people join in.
Okay, Don?
I think that's where I would. I'm not an expert in this area, but that would be where I would go to. Is if you're a customer-centric organisation, then it would feel to me being very important to own and therefore really understand that, and having that with somebody else who you hope is talking in your voice, with your tone, and with your nuance, and especially when it's a conversation you're trying to have with your customers. From a personal point of view, I can see a real pro for having it in-house, because you get much more control over that tone.
Okay, John?
Well, I could talk about this for a long time, but I think just to keep it succinct, I think that the thing is, as now, and I also think we talk a lot about digital marketing, and everybody talks about digital marketing, and I think that's because it used to be a thing, but actually I think it's now just marketing. Now, because marketing is predominantly, there's always a digital element to it. It also gets masked as this whole, should we do this bit? But I think the biggest pros are control. And going back to Minter's point about, if you genuinely want to put the customer at the heart of your organisation, the ability to communicate with that customer as an authentic brand is really important. So it's control around that side of it from brand, but it's also control around budgets and around the KPIs and the metrics, because again, some agencies will sell you what they want to sell you, and they'll convince you it's a great idea to do something, and they might be on a kickback from a brand, from a media partner, or they might be, there's loads of different reasons in this murky world of agency and brand, where nobody really knows what's going on, and I really want to sort of open the box on that. And I think the advantages are, it's the complete transparency and the complete clarity on, actually, I'm paying Google to do this, I'm paying this company to do that, and we're in complete control of that. Mm. There's obviously, and I'm sure we'll go on to it, there's obviously downsides, but yeah. I think it's the control, visibility, and putting your trust into a big channel and taking control of that channel, so you've got the skills in-house.
Yeah, okay, I mean, let's move then to the cons. What are the downsides that you can see for in-housing? I can see there's quite a few comments building up on the chat line as well. So,
for me, I would just worry about whether or not you could have the depth of expertise and knowledge in-house for the amount of cost that you can have. So you can treat an outhouse as a bit more of a variable cost. You can dip in and out of somebody who's very, very experienced in the specifics that you want. I would worry about that. And again, I would go back to either side of this. I would still worry, and I love Minter's view on this, about how you build the digital capability around your boardroom table to effectively manage this and to drive it in the right direction, irrespective whether you've in-housed it or out-housed. That strikes me as being a very key in this debate.
Yeah. Minter?
So just circling back, Don, on the issue of board meetings, it's interesting. In the board meetings I'm going, we're always doing these via Zoom, and it's patently obvious how little digital savviness is there. I mean, they finally get the camera going, but they still have the notifications pinging. They don't have a proper video. The microphone is terrible quality. They're always fussing and fighting about getting onto it. So that's one example. And the second is that it's very obvious to see if they're digitally savvy. You just need to look on if they have a proper LinkedIn profile, much less a Twitter profile. And if they don't know and don't do that, then it's a pretty good indication about their digital savviness. As far as cons of bringing it in, there are two that I would highlight. The first is voice. It's a very easy thing to say, well, what's your voice? It's a far harder thing to execute against that. And it takes having a little bit of access into personality. And so you can be dry, which the majority of companies tend to go towards because they're too scared to say something political or divisive or interesting, actually. All they'll do is sort of promote themselves with a dry voice. So if you don't have a voice, in-housing, it isn't going to solve that anytime soon. The second one is not to be understated, because when you create, when you have an in-house agency, one has to recognize that these are creative talents, many of them. You have programmers, there are different designers, there are different elements to it, but do you know how to manage creative people? So if you're in an insurance company or a bank, you're not used to hanging out with creatives. And so I think there's a real challenge of knowing how to manage a creative team in many environments.
Yeah. John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of people challenges, and I'll bundle that into one big challenge, and I think that stems from recruitment and attracting the right talent, and how do you position yourself against agencies? Is in-house less appealing to being in an agency where you get all the free beer and the pool tables and it's seen as cool? And then I suppose the other bit is what's the practicalities of having a small team in-house? What happens when they go on holiday? What happens if they're off sick? And all these sort of practicalities. And I suppose one of the advantages potentially in the old agency model was their breadth of multiple people who can do the same thing. So there's definitely a need for some level of backup and support if you are, as we talked about, a smaller team trying to in-house. Because I think that's the risk. If you're Vodafone, you can have 5 people do the same thing. But if you're a smaller business, you might have one person doing 3 things. And if they go off on holiday or they go off sick, what do you do then? So I think there are certain risks. And I suppose the big debate is, will do the pros outweigh the cons?
Yeah. And I think the other element is, to me, it boils down to expertise as well. I mean, when I joined the industry over 20 years ago, you know, there was design below the line, above the line, you know, a PR, that pretty much covered everything that was done in marketing. Now, if you were to list all the things you need to know about marketing, it would take us most of the rest of this time that we've got in the webinar. So how can we possibly get all of that expertise at the right level, you know, in-house? That would be, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges. Nobody can understand the whole of marketing at the moment, so you'd have to have quite a big team, or be able to draw on expertise from somewhere else, I think.
Yeah, Diane, somebody said to me, Mitchell, I'd love your view on this, which is, to be a great CMO, you have to be almost the perfect human being. You have to be right-brained and left-brained all at the same time, and exceptional at both. So creative and analytical, and those people don't really exist. So, you know, is it in fact a role that needs to be split in half?
Yeah, well, that might be a whole other debate for another panel. But I did actually see a couple of CMO job specs recently, and I read through them, and it went on and on and on and on and on. By the time I got to the end, I thought, I don't think it really matters what the salary is at the end. That's an impossible job. It's far too much.
Get a cape.
Do all of that. Yeah, exactly. We're going to do one more poll, and then we're going to look at some of the questions and comments that are coming in. So we've just been talking about some of the pros and cons. So let's see in the next poll, what's the biggest concern you face if you're considering in-housing? And I would ask if this is only answered by people who are buying or organising marketing services for their brand.
I don't think we can vote again. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
That's because they knew that you'd vote multiple times, John.
Yeah, I think you can only vote once.
How are we doing with the completion?
We're about 50%, so it's probably statistically valid. So yeah. I'll just share that.
I think it's potentially most of our eligible people. Oh, wow, right. Well, there's not really much doubt about what the biggest concern is there. So yeah, definitely people and talent. So just what we were just discussing. Did we get to, do all these polls get recorded as part of the...
we'll put them in, and then we'll after the session, we'll not only share the video, we'll share sort of a summary of the salient points of what everybody's come up with. Okay. So
yeah, second most important thing is concern over managing the day-to-day. I think there's probably not an understanding at many levels of the detail that's involved in, you know, modern marketing. So okay, let's have a look at some of the questions and comments. Are there also levels of outsourcing from full management through to in-house, managed and executed out of house? John, why don't you answer that one?
So I was reading the comments as well. Can you? I can't multitask. I'm a bloke.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes,
yeah, sure. Are there also levels of outsourcing from full management through to in-house managed and in-house managed and executed out of house? So I suppose that's a hybrid. Is it a hybrid?
Yeah, so, and I suppose that with that was that one of my team that asked that question, because
Well, I'm not sure.
Question.
Is it planted? Is it planted?
Yeah, so, and I think ultimately that's where you need to get to, because I think the cost benefits, or any cost benefits of bringing something in-house where you say, well, actually, we've got graduates doing this execution work, but we're paying £500 a day, that can't make sense, versus, well, actually, we need some senior practitioners to help us with some strategy or some ideas or some vision. So I do think ultimately there's the opportunity for brands or retailers is a sort of hybrid model where you have the best of both. You don't necessarily have everything outsourced, but you don't necessarily have everything insourced. I also think the challenge, if you insource everything, is how do you actually know you're still doing a good job? And how do you know you're keeping on top of best practice? Because one of the things by being with a big agency, they're managing multiple campaigns across multiple businesses, and they know what good looks like because they're seeing it all the time in lots of different campaigns, and there's lots of learnings. So I suppose it's what technology and support is available to ensure that your in-house team is on top of their game every month and is benchmarked against your competitors, and that they're actually doing a good job. Because again, if the concern is managing that talent, how can you get help and resource from somewhere else to just maybe run the ruler over them on a regular basis? Yeah. So, but yeah.
Okay.
Diane,
yeah.
Diane, I wonder if John, I wonder if there's a sort of a scale, a spectrum that you move through as you shift scale of your business, or you go through a different growth phase. So in other words, if you're in that startup scale up phase, is there a spectrum that you shift down, or as Minter started to allude to, I think at L'Oreal, when you get to that sort of scale, actually you're going to have more in-house expertise. So are there growth phases that as a business you can start to talk about?
I think there definitely are, and I see Sergio has made a similar comment on the chat there, which is, as a startup business, outsourcing to an agency of experts makes much more sense. Because they get that breadth of knowledge and the depth of knowledge they couldn't possibly have themselves. I suppose it depends on the nature of the business and the speed of growth of the business, what the right time is.
And I also think
even just to appoint your own first marketing exec or your CMO.
And I also think there's, with that hybrid model, you could get to a situation where you have access to that talent and that senior thought leaders with the years of experience, but you're not necessarily paying for the execution, if that's a model that you went down. So there could be some sort of blend between having access to that knowledge but you're not paying a lot of money for execution. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, we've got quite a few questions, so let's
we're going to have to write a whole blog to answer all these questions. I don't think we're going to get through them, so apologies if we don't get through all your questions.
Yeah, okay. I think we should try and get through as many as we can. So one of the drivers of out-housing is the need to keep up with new tech or processes. If you in-house, how do you keep your internal knowledge, skills and aptitude up to date? That's from Lara. Hi, Lara.
Shall I take that?
You may.
Yeah, hi Lara. I think often now the agencies overplay what special tech they have. And there is certainly certain tools they have that are expensive, that they split the cost across many clients. But realistically now, with the move to the cloud and the move to open source, there's a lot more tech and tools that are a lot more affordable than maybe you thought. But potentially, if you had a hybrid solution, the people who you're working with for reporting or a hybrid could give you access to the tools without paying a full agency rate. But it's a very, very valid point and needs to be considered when you think about moving away from your agency. It's not just the people, it's also the tech. And that's a very valid point.
I think though one of the interesting phenomena about all this tech that makes our lives easier is for every sort of 20 grand you spend on tech, you probably need to spend at least 10 on somebody to own it, operate it, look after it. Don, do you see that recognition of that fact, in the companies that you work with?
Yeah, I think there's an overwhelming amount of technology actually for most. I have the privilege of going to NRF every year, which is the largest retail conference in the world in the States. which was held face to face this year. Who knew that we were going to be like this and not able to fly? But that's got, you know, 4 or 5 football fields worth of technology. Quite often, a technology that's a single point solution, and actually combining it all is a problem in its own right, let alone just getting yourself through the volume. So I think for a number of clients I've got, they would have 3 or 4 trusted sources that would give them that they go to for that horizon scanning, so they can provide a filter, at least for those things that are working, and testing it amongst your peers. I think peer group huddles and sharing about what's working from a technology point of view, what's made a big difference, can make a big difference. Is that sort of peer filtering and advocacy can make a big difference as to pointing yourself in the right direction that can help you.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring in a comment from I think it's Tish or Tish. Whatever we do, I think we need to be a lot more creative and lateral, delegating activities, and the tune of this delegation will be highly examined, and the need to preserve cash. Creative thinking, lateral thinking, Minter, is that something that would suffer?
That suffers from in-house, you say?
Yeah.
Well, yes and no. I mean, so I when I was running Redken, the hairdressing company in the States, we had a very incredible in-house team, and the interesting thing was that they were sort of also figuring out how to work decision making in a corporate environment. So you can have crazy ideas in-house, you can have crazy ideas at house. I think it's possible. Certainly this idea of learning, you need to be aware. And I think a lot of people working in companies who don't have in-house aren't even really aware of what's going on. And when an agency says, oh, I got a really great bell and whistle here, you should try this. Oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, so under the guise of thinking that this is learning about something new, they quickly will say yes, because they're not familiar enough. Whereas I think that once you are managing your own budget and you are learning from the mistakes that you will be making, you learn a lot quicker. And then once you've got the a little bit of expertise, it's like programming. You learn C, and then you learn about Python. You learning how languages work, and then you can build on the languages you need for next. So if you don't have Python, well, you need to hire Python coders. So you need to be able to have that sort of flexibility. And I think that the nature of it is having a flexible relationship, and with an eye, if you can afford it, certainly. And if you have a good voice and a real brand, then you have to be thinking about moving towards in-housing.
Yeah. Okay, great. We've got so many questions coming in, and we had some other questions to ask. So I'm going to go back and ask one that we discussed earlier as being super, super important, which is around the data that's driving marketing decisions, strategic decisions within brands. So agencies have lots of mathematicians, data scientists, and so on. They've been building up that capacity for a while, but how can in-house teams understand which metrics they should be measuring, and are they going to be able to get hold of the people with the right skills? Don, do you want to?
Well, I was going to go. That sounds like a perfect one for Minter to answer, because he must have had that challenge. I think.
Yeah. Okay, Minter, go ahead.
So,
well, I'm going to
throw that at you, Minter.
Yeah, no, good. I'm, this is this kind of stuff I rolled with, and I think that there's a bigger question, which is around about who your customer is and how important is it for you to relate with your customer. And I give you an example. I remember one time arriving in a new job. I was marketing manager or something, and I arrived, and underneath the desk, I found this pile of postcards. And so I said, "What are these?" And there's a little bit of dust. I dusted them off. Oh, it was something like 60,000 postcards from customers with their data that had been sitting there for 2 years. So the point is, you might have a lot of data about your customers, but are you really interested in them? So what data are we getting for? Are we really interested in the customer? Are we product centric, or are we customer centric? Are we process and filled with legal worries and a different kind of approach, or are we going to go with it? So you need to really be interested in your data, and you need to have an organizational approach to sharing that data. And then you have to share it with your agency. Do you trust your agency? Is your agency working only for you in your industry, or they also have other competitors they're working for, or not? and what kind of relationship do you have with the agency? Because a lot of that can be confidential. Is it breachable? Is it shareable? And so I think conversation, of course, is really, are you interested in being on top of your customers? And therefore you go after and find the data. And therefore afterwards, if you don't have a data scientist, you hire a data scientist. But you have to learn how to figure out how to manage who your customer is and how you're going to engage them better yourself.
Yeah. I mean, assuming you managed to, sorry, John, did you want to come in there? Yeah, you go ahead.
I just felt a bit like the guy from the BBC News with the children coming in. There is a huge sign on the door saying, please do not disturb, but that's a classic 12-year-old thinks she knows better. Anyway, a good lesson in life there for both of us. But I think the point Minter makes is really important, but I think also the challenge all boardrooms face, which I think is one of the things agencies often play on, is there's so much data and it is so complex and people don't necessarily know which numbers to look at. And actually, they overplay the complex nature of it to make it sound more complicated than it is. And actually, there's probably a few metrics you need to understand to drive your digital business forward. And actually, if they could understand, right, we need more people on the website, we need a better average order value, and we need a better conversion rate. Right, and are we focusing on acquisition or are we focusing on customer lifetime value? And and once they start understanding those metrics, they can then potentially start driving their business forward. But I think everybody gets distracted or confused by big agency databases and reports around attribution, about which customer persona, about this, and it makes it sound so complicated. They think, well, we'll leave it with those experts over there. And I think that's as the tech gets better and as people's knowledge improves, I think that will slowly change. But it's got to change from the top down, as Don said before. People have got to understand the metrics and the KPIs that drive this.
Yeah. They also have to understand the huge amount of investment to get the people and the systems to manage all of that themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, or find the right level of support, whether that's in-house, outside, because again, you don't necessarily have to in-house everything. There could be elements where you pull on resource as required around analytics or support, or somebody comes in and does a project to set you up and train you. So there's different degrees and levels. Yeah.
Okay, so we were supposed to finish at about 1:45, but I'm gonna let it run on a bit, and if people need to go, obviously they need to go. But we've still got some questions to get through. So one of the things is, even assuming that you get the right skills into your team if you're in-house, what about the issue around capacity? Because sometimes work's down or times are tough. Does having your marketing resource in-house give a brand more or less ability to flex their costs? And when more work appears, are they going to have access to the staff and skills they need to meet surges? So Minter, do you have something a point of view on that?
Oh, of course. So yes, well, I think the reality is it definitely depends, because there are times when you have more flexibility and leeway with your own team to do things and demand stuff, and because you can be in there right away, and they don't have to go through some sort of process of approval over at the agency side to say, is this the right thing we should send to the customer? Because the boss isn't ready. The boss is dealing with 3 other customers or agents. So I can, if I'm the boss and I go into the room and I can decide then and there, all right, that's the right Pantone color, go for it, bang, quickly. We can sharpen that up, and then, hey, listen, can I ask you to work until 8 tonight? We've got something that's urgent. I'm doing that within my team. That depends on how you manage teams. Or then, let's say the weekend, I've got this bonanza with 10,000 people. We would do one event every year for 10,000 people. Well, we definitely needed help. So you rope in, according to the needs, the extra, man hours, women hours, and also the capacities that are needed. In this case, we were doing a Broadway show, level 45-minute show for 10,000 people. Well, we certainly didn't have that in-house, and we needed stagehands, we needed actors, and all this other stuff. And then the TV production team was outsourced, albeit with a great relationship. So at the end of the day, I think that there are opportunities. You can sometimes have quicker decision-making and flexibility to do more when it's in-house, but sometimes you're going to need more people and different expertises. Then go find them.
Yeah, good point. Good point about the ability to work more quickly when there's a surge in demand.
I think that's a trend that's come out in the last for many clients, is that the speed with which they've been able to operate now. I've had a number of companies say, I've got to capture some of the way in which we're working now, because I want it to continue after this without having the crisis moment, and speed and agility. And I think also Minter touched on, you know, the appetite and the ability to partner with somebody, I think is going to be increasingly important going forwards in the world we're about to go into.
John, I just want to jump in and say that I've observed in a couple of my board meetings, some people are actually seeing that they're typically large, very sort of bureaucratic companies have all of a sudden gotten a little quicker at moving. And so, you know, when should we do this event? Well, we could do it in January 2021. Which hotel are we going to use? Blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, why don't we do it next week? Because we don't have so many things to worry about. And they're actually thinking that way now, as opposed to sort of that more statutory, institutionalized approach.
Yes, one client said to me that we managed to do a deal with a partner in 72 hours that would have taken me 9 months to get to board level.
Interesting. Okay, there's a question from John Buckley, which is, if you owned an e-commerce transactional site yourself, what approach would you take and why? I'm assuming none of you actually do.
Well, I've worked on a number of companies like that, and there I have seen both examples outsourced. For me, if you're an e-commerce company, which is pure player, therefore, it does bespeak being far more in-house, because everything is so related. There's really very small gap between the customer service, between the e-commerce site itself, and all things around it. And when those things let's say the wall between you is further away, then that's going to make things more asynchronous, harder to be more fluid, and getting everything to relate in together. I feel that if you're in e-commerce, it generally works better. But you know, you still need to have the right capacity, the right attitude. And if you don't have a brand, you need to work on that too.
I think it's not just e-commerce. Well, I suppose it depends on how big a point of e-commerce is your revenue. And again, back to the point we talked about before, the more valuable this channel becomes, the more and more you will need to in-house and take control and retain that knowledge and the ability to make the right decisions and look at the right data and KPIs. I would say, I completely agree with Minter, if you are 100% online, you should have the majority of this in-house. You might need some external branding, you might not have certain things, but the day-to-day transactional digital marketing should be under your control.
Yeah, and if you need television and you don't know how to do TV ads, then you go get an agency that knows how to help you out with that. But so you pick and choose according to what your needs are, your lack of capacities and expertise.
But it feels to me, Minter, that we're in a place where actually the answer is not an on-off switch here. The answer is you decide on the best foundation for you, given what sort of business you're in, what scale of business you're in, and what your growth phase might be. And then you have the ability to bolt on, because even if you choose to wholly outsource, you've got to have some capability to be able to manage that and the KPIs and driving your agencies correctly. So you're going to have some in-house resource at some point. And if you have in-house resource, you're going to for an in-house foundation, you're going to have to be able to flex up and partner with an outsource for certain elements of your marketing needs.
I'm not a big one for dogma. Yeah, I'm not a big one for dogma. So you're running a large company like L'Oreal, where you have 40 different brands. Maybe some brands really need to have a little bit more white glove treatment of your customers, and that's obviously strategic. For others, you might say, well, you know, we don't want to do that. The business model doesn't work that way. Our margins aren't good enough for it, or our strategy is different. So I wouldn't say it's a blanket approach in any event.
Yes, it's this balance that you're trying to achieve.
Okay, so we're going to do two last questions because we really are running out of time now, and one last poll. So one of the biggest items in an earlier poll was the biggest concern was around people. So let's focus our last two questions on that. So first of all, talent of the team in general, finding and retaining it. I think that it's fair to say that being in-house is seen as a bit less sexy than being in the funky agency world. But with a likely layoff, I think, of massive numbers of people in agencies that's about to happen, is this sort of snobbery going to become a bit less relevant, where people will be really needing a job and they wanted to go wherever those jobs are? If we can just keep the answers quite brief so that we can get through the last couple of bits.
I think if you look at some of the interesting and exciting brands, let's say Gymshark and other brands that are coming around, and they're starting to behave more like agencies and tech businesses anyway. So I think the opportunity to attract that talent is, well, think a bit more like an agency. I'm not saying everybody should start putting free beer in the fridge and have a pool table, but it's more about the attitude. But what is interesting about going in-house is the ability to make quick decisions and actually own that customer relationship and drive the brand forward. Whereas often at the agency, might have loads of great ideas, but you're not necessarily allowed to do them because the brand says no. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to have excitement at a brand or a retailer.
Okay, and Minter, you were brand side yourself, so
yeah. So the question was on the ability to have talent, and I know whether it's exciting. So one of the things that's interesting is in the agency model, a lot of people pay attention to the awards for prizes of ads, and it's sort of considered the Oscar-y thing of working. You don't really get that when you're working, or it's very unlikely you're going to get that when you're working in-house. So one of the things that you need to pay attention to is, as I was mentioning earlier, how do you manage creatives? How do you keep them motivated? What motivates them? And it's not necessarily about pay, although that, having paid, a job and security is a thing. But, you need to be able to tap into the emotional, more personal elements of motivation of your team. And in that creative space, maybe recognition is a good thing to do. It can be a very unthankful job being in-house in a large organization. Who gets the praise when the product launch does well? Is it the scientific person who innovated and created it? Is it the head of marketing who's very happy to say, oh, look what I did? Or is it the creative person? And where is their praise within that? So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. And Don, I know you're not from the agency world, but you do have a close family member who's chosen to work in-house with Radley. So.
Yeah, so I mean, John touched on security and job security, where that changes, and we touched on, I think Minter touched on recognition. For me, there's also a point here about the learning environment that you go on. So how can you feel that if you put your time in a certain place with a certain employer, that you are going to be better and both a better human being and have a better opportunity to grow your employment chances. So I think there's some way of describing the learning that you might be able to get in-house that could be better articulated, actually, rather than the learning that you might just get from an agency, because you're going to get variety.
Great. Okay, so last question then is, how will CMOs, the people running all this new resource, how will they have to change their skills?
I can start if one of the things we haven't mentioned is the word humility. And it's, for having been a marketer, I can tell you with me and the group of people in marketing I was with, it wasn't our number one talent, our number one skill, our number one attitude. And so to your point, Don, about being able to do everything, a master of all tricks and hats, I think that today a real marketer is actually a networker, a connector. And they are self-aware enough to know what they're not good at, and humble enough to ask for help when they see the need, and I would say the ability, the introspection to say, all right, I'm not doing what I should be doing. Always being able to say, well, what am I doing wrong? What am I not knowing about? And so having the humility and the hunger to learn about what other people are doing. So that's what I think the CMO should be thinking today.
Okay, and John, you've run agencies, large agencies, so you know what's involved in running them out of house.
Yeah, so I think the challenge, and I think Don and you highlighted it with the job spec in left brain, right brain, and I think they need to ultimately be the voice of the customer inside the brand. And I think in order to be a good CMO, you've got to put your customers at the heart of all of that, and then understand what tools, agencies, partners, activities are going to attract more good customers for your business. And I think that's both a data problem and a creative problem, or opportunity. So but I think they need to be the voice of the customer at the boardroom table.
Yeah, And then Dawn, at the boardroom table,
Well,
how our CMO is going to have to change.
Well, I thought there were some things that I took out from what Mincha said, which is, insatiable curiosity, I think is required, as also this healthy dose of paranoia and a dissatisfaction with present, actually, that you can be better tomorrow than you can be today, and therefore this hunger to learn and continue to learn. And I think, to put it right, was the humility to know that you're not a finished article. I think is going to be really required.
Yeah. Somebody's commented about how Maslow's hierarchy of needs applies even more at the moment, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting. It's not all about the money or the ping pong table.
If I could, I wanted to bounce back on a thing that Don said at the very beginning, which is that the trends that were before coming through. And I do feel like there's an exacerbation of certain trends. And the one that really stands out for me is this notion of why. Actually, is it important for me to be selling shampoos or widgets or whatever? What am I actually doing with that? And I think that there's a lot of introspection that I see happening about what's important, and a reviewing of actually functions in society that are important. And so I think that there was a need before to become more authentic, have more purpose, but I think that there's going to be an accentuation from the bottom and from the top of this idea of, why am I doing all this? Why am I working so hard? And what's important in life?
Mitchell, just touching on that, that's a conversation that we've had with a number of boys, is on that ESG agenda. It started with the G, it moved to the E, and David Attenborough helped us with that. And now the S is very much prime. And although it's not, we've heard a lot about the social purpose and the businesses that have chosen to participate and do great stuff. I feel that that's again another trend that's going to accelerate. I agree with you entirely about purpose.
I think that's a perfect place to go to our last poll, because it's all about the purpose of what we are in marketing and how we contribute in the world as marketers. So last poll, and thank you so much for everybody who stayed on, because I can see that most people have stayed on. What's the best description of your position with regard to in-housing? So Abby, if you could pull that up, that's brilliant, thank you. So I already do everything in-house, and actually could we limit this to the marketing services buyers only, please? I do some in-house, I'm happy with the level. I do some in-house, I'm considering increasing it. I don't do anything in-house, but I might. And I don't do anything in-house, and I'm not going to. We haven't, we've not been convinced by anything on the pros today, but totally convinced by the cons, I suppose, would be the last group there.
And just, we've got, I think everybody's seen, everybody on the panel's seen, we've got too many questions that we can't get through. So what we'll do afterwards is we'll summarise the questions, and again, we will also put some answers and create a blog and a follow-up email for everybody, because there's clearly quite a lot of debate and interest in this. One of the questions I've just seen whilst people are filling in that poll was, what's Google's view on in-housing? And I can't represent Google, I don't represent Google, but one thing we did see when I was running, when I'd been working at previous agencies, was that Google were going more and more direct to manage the end client. And when we used to look after Argos, we would regularly have run-ins as the agency, because Google would say one thing, which is fundamentally spend more money with Google. We would say, well, actually, maybe you don't need to do that, because this is, and over time, Google wants to have a bigger relationship direct with the brands. That's both an opportunity and also potentially a threat. But Chris asked that question just recently. I think there is, and also what we've got to be careful with Google as well is they're also trying to sell tech, which I think was, Lara asked a question earlier about tech. Google are not just an ad platform, they're now, they will sell you some technology. So they're definitely pushing in-housing.
So, see the poll?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Okay, so we've got quite a spread, with the smallest group being the ones that they don't do anything in-house but are considering in-housing. So 29% are doing a level of in-housing that they're happy with. And 10% don't in-house anything and are not planning to change that either. I mean, what we could do is we can, you know, we'll be publishing, as John says, we'll be publishing these polls as part of it. So we'll be able to have a closer look at that and see what
I wonder if anyone's changed opinions.
Well,
we could probably compare the first poll to the last poll.
Yeah, exactly.
And see if there's a shift in opinion during the last hour.
Yeah. Well, I hope at least we've given people some food for thought. As I said at the beginning, our current economic crisis could well be a catalyst for a big change in in-housing. I mean, we're hearing many stories of brands that are just completely stopping all their budgets to their agencies, but then they'll have that budget in the future, and how are they going to spend it? So we've explored the pros and the cons of DIY marketing services, and now it just remains to be seen how the landscape of the client-agency relationship will shift over the coming weeks and months. So thank you to our panellists, Dawn and Minter, and to John and the team at Modo25 for setting up the session. All attendees will receive a link to the recording, so do look out for it. And thanks very much for joining us. Bye now.
Thank you, Diane.
Thanks, Diane.